Today we're going to look at section 6.3, function operations and composition. Our objectives are to be able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide functions, and to be able to find the composition of functions. So our first thing is going to actually be review. I'm asking you to find g of -1. And if you remember, what that means is we're going to take our g function, input a -1 wherever I see an x, because the x is in parentheses and now it's a -1, and then evaluate. So the important thing here is to use parentheses because it will make a difference in some of our operations. So this is going to be 1 plus 1 minus 2, which is 2 minus 2, which gives me an answer of 0. So to write it correctly, I have g of -1 equals 0. And again, that means if I input a -1, we get a 0. In our last chapter, we actually use the remainder theorem and synthetic division to find that. But for this chapter, since we're just dealing with normal functions, it's okay just to input it in. So now when we get to the operations, now I have f plus g of x is how we say that. And what I'm asking you to find is f of x plus g of x. That's another way to write this. Sometimes on your worksheet you'll see it written like this, sometimes like this. So what does that mean? Well, it means take the f function, I'm going to use red for that, x squared minus 4, and I'm going to put in parentheses to show that's the whole function f of x, and the operation says to add, and I'm going to add the g function, and again I'm going to use parentheses, x squared minus x minus 2. So what we did in the last chapter, section 5.3, is this is how I started the problem. I just gave you two functions and I asked you to add, subtract, multiply, or divide them. Well, now I'm taking a step back where I give you it in notation form and I ask you to find the functions, substitute them in, and then do the algebra. So it's very similar to what you've already done. So if I get my final answer here, combined like terms, I'm going to get x squared and x squared is 2x squared. I have a negative x. -4 plus -2 is a -6. So my answer would be f plus g of x equals that. And all that means is if I add the two functions, that should be my final answer. Well, what if I have g minus f of x? What does that mean? Well, that just means I'm going to take the g function and subtract the f function. Okay? So the g function, again, we're going to use parentheses because this is a problem where parentheses makes a big difference. I'm going to subtract, and now I'm going to use the f function, which is x squared minus 4. Okay. So the reason parentheses are so important is because if I actually just write this out now, x squared minus x minus 2, if I distribute the negative, negative x squared plus 4. Now if I combine like terms, I have no x squareds, I have a negative x, and then plus 2. And that's what I get when I take the g function, subtract the f function in terms of x. And that would be my final answer. Well, what if I have f times g of x? Again, what that means is take the f function, f of x, and multiply it by the g function, g of x. So f of x, again, use parentheses, is x squared minus 4. The g function, x squared minus x minus 2. And I truly want you to multiply those, so now we have to distribute. I'm going to get x to the 4th minus x cubed minus 2x squared. Okay, once I've distributed the first term, now I go to the second term. Okay, this is going to give me a negative 4x squared. I like to write it underneath my like term to make it a little bit easier. This is going to give me a positive 4x, and this is going to give me a positive 8. Okay, if you line it up this way, it makes it a lot easier to get your final answer. I have x to the 4th power minus x cubed minus 6x squared, because we're adding, plus 4x plus 8. And again, this is what I get when I take the f function and multiply it by the g function in terms of our x. Okay. And let's do one more operation. F divided by g of x. Again, all this means is I'm going to take the f function and divide it by the g function. So go up, take the x function, x squared minus 4. We're going to divide it by the g function, which happens to be x squared minus x minus 2. Now, we haven't done too much of this stuff yet, but in our last chapter, 5.4, you had to do a lot of factoring. So let's think about how we can simplify these problems or break them down a little bit. X squared minus 4 is a difference of two squares, which hopefully remember is x plus 2, x minus 2. Again, the order of which one comes first does not matter. If I look at my bottom function, I have a trinomial, which should factor to an x minus 2 times an x plus 1. Okay, that gives me a multiplication of negative 2 and addition of negative 1. Now if I look here, I should notice that I have the same term on the top and the bottom. I can't do any simplifying here because these terms are connected with a plus or minus and they're not individual factors. But you can always simplify out factors. So my final answer would be an x plus 2 divided by an x plus 1. Again, I can't simplify the x's because they're connected to our other terms, our 2 and our 1. But that's what I get when I take the f function and I divide it by the g function in terms of x. Those are our 4 different operations. But now you're going to see something called composition of function. This is where you have to be very careful. It looks very, very similar to our multiplication, except now this is an open circle. This means we're doing a composition, and this is read as f of g of x. And again, this will have a new way to write it. This is f of g of x. And again, sometimes you'll see it like this on the homework, sometimes like this. So what does this mean? Well, if you see, okay, we've dealt with, our PEMDAS. When we have our order of operations, we start with our parentheses, work inside out. Well, the inside one is just an x, so I don't have anything to do with that. So, but I do know what g of x is. And I know g of x is x squared minus x minus 2. But I still have this f on the outside. So what is it asking me to do? Well, it's asking me, just like that first problem, that g of negative 1, to input this into the f function. So if I look at the f function, if you look right here, in the parentheses is an x, and here's another x. But now it doesn't want me to put an x in, it wants me to put this entire function in. So instead of, all composition is substitution of larger things, basically. So what this is asking me to do is go up to my f function, and wherever I see an x, I'm going to input this in. Okay, so remember, this is the f function, x squared minus 4, but they don't want an x. They want this function, x squared minus x minus 2. So what's that going to look like? X squared minus x minus 2 squared minus 4. So let me write this out for you. X squared minus x minus 2. If something is squared, it's multiplied by itself twice. So this is similar to the last problem we did, but now we actually have a little bit more algebra, and you could tend to get that with composition. So I'm just going to write this up here so you can see it a little bit better. This is going to be, if I distribute x to the 4th minus x cubed minus 2x squared. Okay, now if I distribute the negative x, I get negative x cubed, positive x squared, positive 2x. Now I have to distribute the negative 2 to everything. That gives me negative 2x squared, positive 2x, and positive 4. So because I had 3 terms, I'm actually going to get 3 rows. So if I take f of g of x, my final answer is going to be x to the 4th power minus 2x cubed. If I add all this, this gives me a negative 1 plus a negative 2 is negative 3x squared plus 4x plus 4. So it just makes the algebra a little bit lengthy compared to what you guys had to do in 5.3. But again, if I would have said, f of 2, like we did in the first problem, you would have gone back up, and anywhere you saw an x, put in a 2. If I had f of even a smiley face, okay, like smiley faces, that just means smiley face squared minus 4. It doesn't matter what I put in the parentheses. What that means is wherever you see an x, that's where you're going to substitute it in. So let's do one more problem. G of f of x. Okay, what that means is I'm going to take the g function and input the f function into it. G of f of x. That's how we read this. So what does that mean? It means I have the g function, and I'm going to input the f function. Well, what is the f function? F of x is x squared minus 4, so I'm going to write x squared minus 4. Alright, so now that means I'm going to look at the g function. It says whatever's in the parentheses, that's where the x's is. Whatever I put in parentheses, I'm going to look for the same places in my formula. So, here we go. So if I go to my g function, everywhere I see an x, I'm now going to input my x squared minus 4. So, I'm going to get x squared minus 4 squared minus x squared minus 4 minus 2. So what's the algebra look like? X squared minus 4, but it's squared, so I have to do that twice. Minus x squared minus 4 minus 2. So this is just practice with our algebra. If I distribute here, I'm going to get x to the 4th minus 4x squared minus 4x squared plus 16. If I distribute the negative here, I get minus x squared plus 4 minus 2. So if I want to write my answer, I have g of f of x equals, if I combine like terms, I have x to the 4th. If I look at my x squareds, that gives me a negative 9x squared. Okay, I don't have any x cubes, I don't have any x's. And now if I look at 16 and 4 is 20, 20 minus 2 is 18. Okay, so my final answer, if I just move this up, okay, is g of f of x equals this. Now, on your homework, sometimes this won't be an x. Okay, so this, I know it's not on your sheet, but if I had asked for g of f of, say, I don't know, 3, what am I asking you to do there? Well, if we write it out, it's the same thing, g of f of 3 now. But remember, we start inside, so the first thing they want you to do is f of 3. So what am I asking you to do here? Well, that means look at the f function and input a 3. So if I go all the way up here and input a 3, that's going to be 3 squared minus 4. 3 squared minus 4 is 9 minus 4, which is 5. So I know this answer is 5. So then my next step would be to do g of 5. Well, what does that mean? That means that anywhere I see an x in the g function, I'm going to put in 5. So that would be 5 squared minus 5 minus 2. 25 minus 5 minus 2 is 20 minus 2, which is 18. So the problem is actually easier when I put a number here because it's all, you don't have x's, you don't have this variable, it's all numbers. So if you see a number in this parenthesis in any problem, you should get a number answer. If you see an x, you should get an x answer unless all the x's cancel out. But that's what composition of function is. I hope you feel a little bit better about adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing functions, and being able to find the composition of a function.